Now imagine that we're sitting in a conference. Imagine that we're at, some networking event and we're chatting and someone says, "What do you do?" And if they ask you, "What do you do?" and there is no suspenseful part of that narrative, if it's just like, "Well, I'm a lawyer."
Mm.
That is a clear articulation of what you do. And if you said, "I'm a lawyer," most people would be like, "Well, thank you. That was the end of that story, and also the end of this conversation. Like I am not
Exactly. Exactly.
interested in anything else." But if you said, "Well, I'm not only a practicing attorney, but I work with professionals, attorneys, and other business professionals to help them understand how to leverage Web 3.0 to drive new lanes of revenue." You're teeing it up for them to go, wait, stop. First, what's Web3? Or wait, did you just say new revenue or a new stream? Like, okay, so what kind of streams are we talking about? Like, and if you said, "Hey, this has been a great conversation, but I actually have to go. I got to get on stage. It's my time to go." They're like, "Okay, wait, I need your info," right? And you're like, "Here, take a picture of my badge. You can look me up. I'm online. I'm everywhere." Great. Guess what? You left it on the cliffhanger. They want more. But
You
if you're
just
like,
you just caught my attention in the first 30 seconds of the
"Yeah,
response.
yeah." But if I just say, "I'm a lawyer," right? And there's worse, right? Like, so I was at CEX and I do this a lot. I walk up to people and I ask, "So, what's your story?" I never say, "What's your job?" I say, "What's your story?" And I don't know, 80% of the people told me what their title at their job was with a period at the end, right? "I work for marketing at so and so." Wow, that's incredibly boring. I'm so not interested in asking a follow-up question. But when someone says, "Well, I'm an entrepreneur and I work with, in the coaching space, in the health space, in the, training space. I help turn blank into blank. I do it by doing blank." Right? It's one of my frameworks that I use when I help people craft their narrative. And if they say something like that, like, I'm a professional trainer and I help non-athletes run their first marathon, and I do it through an unconventional video training platform. You're like, "What? Tell me more," right? Like, this is interesting.
Absolutely.
I want to
Absolutely.
know, right? So the most important thing, right? The first thing, if we're talking about actionable, practical stuff, is craft a narrative for yourself that is suspenseful. Leave it on a cliffhanger. Make them ask you. We used to talk about, elevator pitches, and the elevator pitch is it's literally like you go from elevator floor 1 to 15, right? And so you're like, that's all the time you have. You do not have a lot of time to get someone to say, "You know what? I think you're really interesting. I'd like to talk more. I need to get your info." That's all you're looking for in that first interaction. And imagine if you're on a Clubhouse or this LinkedIn audio, any of these things, there's going to be all these people who are speaking. After you and I get done, we'll put a bunch of different people on stage, a lot of people talking. And somewhere in here, right, someone's going to listen to someone and say, "I heard this little bit. I want to follow up with them." The very first lesson, right, is be interesting. Learn to craft your narrative in a way that is interesting and compelling and is somewhat suspenseful so that people follow up.
And that's something we can learn. It's something we're not born with knowing how to do, but it's something, and I'm speaking from personal experience, it's something we can learn. Chris, when I'm in trial, we had to learn how to pick a jury and develop rapport. We had to learn how to craft an opening statement in a way that basically encompasses everything you just said, instead of being that typical lawyer who's boring everyone in the first 3 to 5 minutes of their opening statement. In my book, The Ultimate Guide to Social Media for Business Owners, Professionals, and Entrepreneurs, you shared a chapter, and thank you for contributing one of the most popular chapters in the book. I believe it was titled The Storytelling Framework That Works Everywhere for Everyone. My question to you, Chris, is are you referencing some of the things that you talked about in that storytelling framework in your earlier answer to my question? And do those techniques that you shared in that chapter also work, or maybe work even better, with social audio and in the metaverse?
They do. My bridge framework, or the storytelling framework that works all the time, it does work. But before we get to that, I'd have to tell you that in order for it to work, you would have to practice it in the same way that you, as a practicing attorney, right? You don't just get up on closing arguments and wing it, right? Like, I can't tell you how many professionals, when they get to the communication part of their job, right? They may be professional in anything else, right? I'm a consultant, I'm a coach, I'm a trainer, I'm a digital designer, I'm an architect, whatever they are. But when it comes to the communication part, they just wing it. And you go, no, why would you do that? Right? This is your one shot at leaving an imprint. You're going to have to practice it. I think about the movie. I don't know if you saw it, Mitch, or if you remember it, but there's a movie called Reservoir Dogs. And in Reservoir Dogs, Tim Roth is an undercover cop. And if you haven't seen the movie, I just spoiled it for you. I'm sorry. But he's Mr. Orange. And Mr. Orange is on a rooftop with his, whatever you call, police handler. And the police handler is giving him this story. It's called the commode story. And Tim Roth is like, what? I have to memorize 4 pages? And he goes, if you're undercover, you're an actor. He tells him, you're like Marlon Brando, and you either have to be great or you're gonna be sucky and you're gonna die, right? Like, it's literally, you have to do this well. And he trains the guy, teaches him to memorize this 4-page script, which of course allows him to tweak and adjust it for his own. And we see over the course of the movie him practicing it and then eventually him delivering it. And when you watch Mr. Orange deliver his commode story, you watch the other bad guys listening fully get connected to it. It's what allows them to bring Mr. Orange into the story. And so the most important thing to note is that the biggest error people make when it comes to communicating and storytelling and telling what they do, how they do it, an interesting case study of work they've done, is they go too long. It's not interesting. It's not compelling. And it's because they're doing it on the fly. And when you do it on the fly and you haven't practiced, you haven't tightened it up, you're going to take too long. And most of us are scratching our head going, what's the point of this? But if you do it right, and if you practice, then it becomes really compelling. Timing is a critical part of communicating. And in social audio, we don't see people. So they might be leaning in, they might be having, characteristics on their face, their hands might be moving. We see none of that. All we get is voice. And if that voice is monotone and drones on and goes on way too long, we've checked out, changed the channel, moved on. So even before you get to the bridge framework, right, you have to get the discipline of practicing, tightening, and getting the story, the narrative, the way you want, which I imagine is how you do your closing arguments, right?
Oh, it's so well planned out. Hopefully it appears as though it's spontaneous from the heart, which it always is, but there's a lot of time and preparation, Chris, put into all aspects of trial. So absolutely. So if we want to start this afternoon preparing our stories, what's the first step we can all take to tell better stories, to build better initial impressions on social audio? Chris, what do we need to do to get started?
So the framework goes like this, right? There is a destination. Where do people want to go? There is a strategy. How are they going to get there? There is the challenge or the conflict. That is the river and the roadblocks. And the river and the roadblocks are, here's where you get stuck, and here are all the things that are in front of you, the encumbrances that make it so that you can't get across. If a story doesn't have any conflict, it's not very interesting. If the story doesn't have someone that you can cheer for, someone that you're rooting for, it's not interesting. If they don't have a mission, if they don't have a goal, if they're not trying to get somewhere, it's boring. So destination, strategy, the river and the roadblocks, and then there's the bridge, right? The solution of where and how to get across, and lastly, the reunion where people connect together, right? And so think about the bridge as you, think about the bridge as your offering, think about the bridge as your product. The problem is most of us go straight to the bridge, right? So we're like, hey, I'm a lawyer.
Right.
And I'm an amazing lawyer. And I'm a really good lawyer. And I'm a good lawyer for this kind of law. And we don't know if someone even needs a lawyer. And we don't know if someone needs that kind of lawyer. We don't even know if the person knows what a lawyer does, right? Imagine if they're from another country and they use a different term. So the bridge, you don't want to jump straight to the bridge. And that's what most people, that's where we make the mistake, right? We pitch the bridge and no one feels like they need a bridge until they're facing the river. So when we go to tell the story, we have to be clear that there is a river. And the next thing we do is we pitch the bridge really quickly. they haven't tried to get over the river. Like if I'm at a river, if I'm stuck somewhere, did I try and cross the river? Did I try and swim across the river? Did I try and pay someone to get me across the river? If I didn't try those things and you show up and say, I can solve all your problems, that's not compelling. But if I have tried to get across the river and I can't, and now I know I need something like the bridge, and you show up and say, oh, I know how to get across this river. Now I'm really, really interested, right? And lastly, we spend so much time talking about the bridge that normally it just feels like we're talking about ourselves. And that's the pitch. That's the stuff you don't like when we talk about elevator pitch. It's because it's like, oh, it's all self-focused. When we spend more time on the river and the roadblocks, then we're connecting and building empathy around the pain. And so by the time we've connected through that and people feel like they really get me, like they know my pain, then when we mention the bridge, they're like, oh yeah, I'm ready for it. Lastly, the fourth mistake is that we skip community, right? It's just about the bridge itself. And you're like, no, what's on the other side of the bridge? Oh, we get a big huddle and we go together and there's a community, there's a connection. People have a deep desire to belong to things and to connect, and they don't want to do things alone, right? And so we often think, oh, my legal services is what you need, or my whatever services is what you need, instead of trying to contextualize what I do in the midst of a larger community.
Can you give an example of what you see people doing wrong and then using the same fact pattern in what you just described, turning it around using your storytelling strategy?
Sure, absolutely. Let's imagine for a second that someone is, a graphic designer, a brand and graphic designer, that kind of person, right? So what they normally do is, someone walks up and says, "Oh, what do you do?" "Oh, I'm a designer and I work with startups to build their brands." And so I answer it right now right away. That's a boring answer, but okay, let's just say I'm a designer. I work with startups to help build their brands. And then they say, so I'm a startup, right? And imagine the other person in the conversation. I'm a startup. So what could you do for us? And this will shock you, right, Mitch? Because this is not how we interact. But a lot of people go straight to, well, I have a 3-day workshop where I dig into your business and I understand everything that's going on. And then I have, different stuff where I can create your overall brand guidelines, or I can create your logos. I create a lot of different artifacts to help with stuff. They went straight into the pitch, right? They jumped to the end and they're like, here's my bridge, right? Here's my offering. And there's nothing. I mean, they went from what you described, step 1 to step 5. They went there right away. And then not 1 out of 20 times someone will be like, I was just talking to my partner about that. We need that. Let's give you a try. The other 19 were like, nah, okay. I mean, I'm going to hear that same story, 50, 60 more times in this networking event. I don't need to make a decision right now. Nothing about it is compelling. Now, imagine on the flip side, we want to agitate the pain. We want to spend time. We want to understand destination, right? We want to understand strategy, what they're doing. And so I may say something like, I work with companies like yours to drive their revenue growth through attraction, lead gen, everything else, leveraging design thinking. And they go, oh, well, tell me more about that. And the moment they say, tell me more about that, I flip it around back to them. And so I say, well, what has your experience been so far with the creation of your brand? I see that you have, you're wearing a t-shirt with a logo on it. So did you guys craft the logo yourself? I want to know, and I want them to tell me about it. Was it easy? Was it fast? And invariably, I'm going to hear war stories, right? Like we had 3 designers. Each one of them was worse than the next one. We ended up going to my cousin to make the logo. None of us loved the logo, but we had to stick it on a shirt for this conference. Like they're going to agitate. We're going to sit here talking about pain, and I'm going to be listening to all of that. And then I go, okay, now I understand river and roadblocks. So I can come back to them. I go, well, if you're like most of my clients, you have tried the logo contests, the websites where you get them done by people you don't know. You've obviously you've tried to hire people, that hasn't worked. You've even gone to relatives and friends to create something. The net result of it is you have something, but it's not only something you don't love, but it's not something that speaks and tells your story to your audience. And that's the worst part, because then it's not memorable. What I do is work with you. We spend about 3 days in a workshop to really pull out what is the essential of who you are and what your story is. And then we take that story and we turn it into a logo mark, into a typeface, into a color palette. If every one of your competitors is blue, we're not going to be playing in that blue color palette, because we want to be distinct and different from everybody else. Does that sound like something that you've done before or that you'd be interested in doing? And that immediately changes the game. But then I can add the community part, which is, and if you are one of my clients, we have this whole group of people that have startups that have already been clients. And I keep that network around because they can provide you feedback on the logo, or especially if we have 2 or 3 options, they can be an internal group that gives you feedback that eventually you'll be part of if we work together. And so now I've connected some dots, I've created some community, I've told the story in a different way. And invariably what will happen is someone will say, not I need to hire you, but they'll say, you get us. You get what we've been through. You understand, you've been there. And that's the empathy that allows people to trust us and then work with us. If you don't have that empathy, then you don't get the trust. If you don't get the trust, you don't get the deal.